How many homeschool hours per day? This is such a great question. How many homeschool hours per day is normal? Don't you wish there was like a simple question for or answer for that? By the end of this video, we'll have touched on three things: what typical homeschool hours are like, how to make them less, and what the real question should be. So, you ready? My name is Bekki. I've been homeschooling over 25 years. We have five kids, five sons. There were times that we had all five kids around our kitchen table. And currently, right now, I still have two kids that are homeschooling. They're actually going to college, but they're still at the kitchen table. They're still schooling. I remember back in the day when we first started homeschooling that I was shocked that it didn't take too long. I was like, "What do you mean we're done already? It's only 11. It's only 10. It's only noon." And the reality is that a typical homeschool day will take less time than a traditional classroom. Why? Because you only have one kid in that grade. Or if you have two or three, you only have one fourth grader, one kindergartner, one second grader. So there's no fill in stuff. You're not looking to keep 20 kids occupied while that last student catches up. And so you have this ability to focus all of your attention on your one, two, three, four, or in my case, five kids, where you're able to get things done faster because you're not trying to make up the gap between the the most academic fastest student and the lower academically leveled student that moves slower, that's maybe more distracted. So the reality of homeschool, how many hours per day should a typical homeschooler take? The reality is it's going to be less than you think, but there is kind of a benchmark. So the kids that are lower, kindergarten, first grade, you can really knock out all of the academic stuff in like an hour, maybe 2 hours on the higher side. There's really no need to sit at a desk or a table for longer than that. As the kids get older, a good benchmark is that they are doing school for about an hour per grade that they're in, up until they're in like fourth, fifth grade. Just a second, up until they're in like fourth, fifth grade. Kids really don't need to be sitting at a desk for longer than a few hours at a time or a few hours in a day. What makes a homeschool day stretch out is something that we're going to talk about in the end, but it really comes down to not having a clear vision of what it is that we're teaching and knowing when to stop a lesson. Super easy to take your kids from one thing to the next, and to look up and it's 5 o'clock and you haven't even gotten dressed yet because you've been just doing the next thing. So, how many homeschool hours in a day? The benchmark will be about an hour per grade that your child is in. But the reality is that it can be less than that. And so the second thing that I want to talk about is doing less school than you would normally think is possible. And the way that you do that is you embrace the whole life aspect of being a homeschooler, realizing that every single thing that you do is sewing into your child's education and equipping them for life. You don't need to have an hour dedicated for reading or for math or for history or for science per se. You can combine subjects together so that as you are reading, there's amazing picture books or storybooks about anything out there. So, for instance, if you pick a storybook about math and you spend time reading this storybook about math, that takes care of literature and possibly math for the day all at the same time. So, to do less hours teaching in the day, try to be more creative about combining your subjects. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is what the real question is that we should be asking ourselves. The reason that we look for how many hours we should be homeschooling every day, there's a couple reasons. Number one, we're new and we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to, right? We don't want to shortchange our kids, our homeschooling experience, and we want to make sure that we get to all of the subjects. So we do that by mapping out every hour of every day. And before we know it, we're spending 6, 7, 8 hours teaching rather than living side by side with our kids. So sometimes it's the fear of not doing enough that causes us to teach for too long in the day. The other reason that we might be homeschooling too long is that our kids are older. It does take longer as they get older, especially if they're heading towards high school, but just not having a firm foundation of goals of what it is that we should accomplish. If you know that the objective for today is for your child to learn how to reduce fractions, if that only takes 5 minutes, then that's how long the lesson takes in the day. You don't need to take an entire hour, to keep teaching it over and over and over again. So, do you know what your goals are in homeschooling? Because without your master homeschool goals established, you're going to be tempted to keep going and adding because you're not quite sure if you're done yet. So without the goal, there's no benchmark to measure yourself against. So, in order to control how many hours you're teaching, start with your firm foundation. Do you know what your master homeschool goals are? By the time your kids graduate high school, they will. Can you answer that question? That's a good starting place. Then, as you're planning each and every day or week of homeschooling, do you know what your goal is for that day? It's typically not page 47. There's typically a nugget that you want your kids to grab before they call it a day and are able to move on to the next thing. So once you identify what that is, the lesson itself doesn't need to take that long. The practicing itself doesn't need to take that long. Once they show that they know it, let them move on to the next thing. So how many homeschool hours does it take? As many as it takes, but also as few as necessary, right? So don't find yourself trapped and chained to your homeschool area in your house. Instead, establish your master homeschool goals, know what it is that you want your kids to learn each day, the nuggets, and then do as little as possible so that you can get on with other things. And I think that's it. So I will see you in the next video. And there is a link below about how to think through your master homeschool goals. See you soon.